Hi, everyone.
There's always a delay, but hi to the replay people. This is
Oh,
our
yes.
show.
We've already got some people in. Hi. Hi,
Oh,
everyone.
hey.
I love the mermaid emojis.
hmm
Can't wait to discuss the book. Yes, us either. So let's give it like 30 seconds or so. I will pull up the little discussion points that we always have, and then we can just dive right in.
Yeah,
So,
so we're going to be talking about A Sprinkling of Murder by Daryl Wood Gerber. This was the first in the series, right?
yep, yep.
Her pen name, she does have a pen name. It is, I don't know if anyone has read her pen name. It's I looked it up. Avery Ames.
I didn't know that was her.
Yeah,
I
same author.
yeah. I first of all, I'm glad that you did that because I feel like either the last book discussion, I think it was the last one. I was floored when we revealed that she was Bree
That's
Baker, I
why
think.
that's why I looked. I was like, okay, I need to see who this is. Honestly, I thought because the pen name sounds like a guy. So I was like,
Mhm,
is this a guy? So I looked it up and yeah, she's Avery Ames and this is her more popular series, this fairy one, because she won
mhm.
like an Agatha Award for this series. So
Oh,
she
okay.
picked the popular one for the first one.
Oh, well, that was totally coincidental. And I read she appeared on an episode of Murder She Wrote. Wow. Well,
I
that's
did
a
not know
deep
that part.
cut. I didn't know that either, and that's amazing. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. I always put this on you because you're better at it than I am. But do you want to give a quick like overview on what the book is about before we jump
Yeah.
in?
Yeah, sure. Okay, gosh, this one was crazy. So our heroine Courtney, she is I think she went to like school, I don't know, it was kind of complicated. She went to school for something and realized that it was not her passion. So she ends up opening like a fairy garden shop. So this shop is selling like fairy garden homes, also gardening supplies. And she is really like following the magic that she had when she was a child, because when she was a child, she would be able to see fairies. So she's kind of like recreating that magic. And one day she goes to her shop and someone is found dead. And this man, he was like the owner of one of the small businesses in town. So he has a lot of people that he was seen having arguments with leading up to his death. But our heroine is also a suspect, so she kind of like has to clear her name and figure out who committed the murder. That was a lot. But I listened to the audiobook. My library had the audiobook. I was just easier. So let us know if you guys listened to it or read it physically. And I ended up giving it 3 stars.
Interesting. Okay, so I actually ended up giving it 4,
Okay.
but my points were probably along the 3-star range. It's just
Mhm.
this is a kind of book where it hit me at that like this is help push me through a book slump, and for that it gets extra points. There are definitely some problematic moments. There are also parts that I love, but like we'll totally get into that. I also listened on audio, which if you guys have stuck around and been to a couple of these book chats, you know, can be very hit or miss for me simply because I'm the narrator can make or break an audiobook for me, and luckily it did not break. It was just kind of in the middle for me, so that's totally fine. Let's go ahead and hold on. Let me see what you guys. Okay, so someone couldn't get into it, which let's hear your thoughts as to why, Shan. 3 stars from Sherry. Didn't love. Oh, thank you, Diva. Um, didn't love the book, but wanted to participate, and Alicia gave it 4 stars. Okay, yeah, right book, right time, which we
Yeah.
all know as readers that makes a huge difference. So let's run down our character list because there were a lot. Um,
That's why I can
so
understand the lower ratings, because there were so
yeah,
many characters. It was a very confusing at times. So I can
yeah,
totally get why it would be tough to like stick through this one, because you had to pay attention.
yes.
It was crazy.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell. I mean, even now having read the book, I couldn't tell if it was just her style of dumping a lot of people at you, or if it was a case where, like, because it's the first book, you have to kind of introduce essentially the whole town because they're going to make a difference later. But I don't know if that's the case. I think it was just a lot of characters.
No, there was a lot of characters because so many of them were suspects, like, they weren't just
Yeah.
side characters, they were also suspects, and to the point of, like, introducing the town and the characters, I still feel like because Cozy Mysteries are so long, there could have been characters that we could have been introduced to later in the series. Because some
Mm,
Cozy Mystery authors do that. Like, the best friend, I feel like she didn't really need to be introduced, like, in this.
yes.
She could have been a character that was added to keep the series going, but I don't know.
Yes. No, I think you make an excellent point, especially because like she wasn't really fleshed out enough. And
Mhm.
so having her have like random side comments, like I glean that she's artisty and maybe like dates around.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the extent of it, but it wasn't enough to again build her up to where she's like helping Courtney out with solving the crimes or like being her wing woman. It's just you're a person who's just along for if anything, I feel like her shop assistant, um whose name ironically I didn't put on the list, but her shop assistant who was like her accountant slash shop assistant who helped her essentially clear her
Oh,
name because she was good with computers. Um, it was fine that she was in. Anyway, okay, so let's run down the characters because there's a bunch of them. So obviously we have Courtney, who's our main character. Somebody mentioned in the comments that oh, it was a narrative that you found annoying. Okay, sorry, I thought that you meant the main character. Um, so she is our main amateur sleuth. I didn't have an issue with her. I feel like she's kind of a typical like inoffensive main character, you know what I mean? Like
I
she
I found her a little annoying. I did. I
okay.
felt like she was an unlikable and slightly, like, unreliable narrator, in my opinion.
Mm,
I just felt like she was such an odd character to me the way that and this is actually how I realized that this was an author's pen name because I was like, "Oh, it makes sense if this is a guy writing this book because it
mm,
looks like our heroine was written, like, by a man." Like,
interesting.
and the way I mean that by is that she was, like, perfect at everything. She was doing way too much. Like, she went to school for, like she was an amateur photographer, but
Mhm.
she also took, like, chemistry classes in school, so she was really good at science. Her
Mm.
father was, like, a police officer, so she was randomly spouting, like, legal jargon and, like, city ordinances,
I
like,
yeah, kind of like
by
that
the
part.
actual code,
Yeah,
and I was
yeah.
like, "No." Like, nobody knows the code for jaywalking. I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
that doesn't make sense. And then she was also, like, a black belt at karate, she could see fairies, she gardened, she was a YouTuber, so I was like, "This girl can literally do everything." I was like, "Clearly she was written by a man." But no.
That's hilarious. And I mean, now that you mentioned it, yeah, and I put up Megan thought that she was bland, and yeah, I mean, I she was just kind of there for me, like someone to saddle up with so that I can like attach myself to see what's going on. I mean, to your point though, she was doing the most essentially. I personally like the fact that she um knew the codes only because it was a way to like clap back at the officer, which is
Oh, okay.
typically what I want from my cozy mystery, where you have the detective trying to like bulldoze over a civilian by like touting some random BS basically. And so she was able to call him out on that because of her dad. Um, but one thing that I thought was interesting was, and I won't get too deep into it because it's not that deep, but like was her relationship with the dad because I feel like the author couldn't figure out where to take it. Like at
Right.
first I thought it was like they were maybe had a strained relationship, but then they didn't have a strained relationship because he was just treating her as how I would imagine a father would treat his daughter, which is like, I want to make sure that you're safe, that kind of situation. So I don't really know where all of that went. I think at the end they were just regular father-daughter relationship.
Yeah,
Um,
at the beginning, I thought he was, like, a judgmental dad, he didn't agree with her choices and things like that,
yeah,
but then in the end, there was, like, a nod to, like, the fact that her mom had passed away, so they had kind of, like they were the only 2 of them that they had left, so I was like,
right.
"Oh, okay, so they just have, like, a regular relationship, and he just doesn't agree with, like, her life choices."
Yeah, which is totally valid because if we suspend, I mean, obviously we have to suspend disbelief because this book is about fairies, but
Right.
if you are living in that world and your wife dies and your kid is talking, locks herself in her room and says that she can see fairies, obviously you're going to be concerned, and like he's supportive as much as he can be. I'm glad, honestly, even though it seemed random and the author ended up dropping it, I am glad that she did drop it because I was starting to get upset at the way that Courtney was depicting her father as being too much, because it's like,
Yeah.
no, he's not doing anything wrong or out of character. He's just being your dad. So
Yeah.
okay, so next we've got Mick. We probably won't say much about him. He was the person who was murdered, the grooming dog, the dog salon groomer. You know what I'm trying to say. The
Mhm.
person who owned the dog groomer
Yeah.
business.
He had this.
Um, yeah, and in this one, like we get a little taste of him in the beginning because it's the kind of cozy mystery where you actually see the character on screen before they are killed off, and um I don't think that he did anything offensive enough to warrant being killed. Like, I know sometimes the characters are like awful, and so everybody becomes a suspect, but he was just kind of, excuse me, the person who was chosen to be killed off with just enough motive from other people. So I was like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and he was seen having arguments with, like, 2 or 3 different people, like, before he was murdered too, so you don't really know much about him, but you did see him generally, like, in the beginning of the book.
Yeah, yeah, and this was interesting to me only because, again, in some cozies, many, I feel like the person who is killed off is somebody that everyone openly dislikes,
Yeah,
and in this case, it wasn't. That wasn't it. So it was kind of hard to figure out or uncover motives as the story went on.
that is true, and that is the thing that cozies do. I feel like because it's a cozy mystery, they don't want you to feel bad for the person that died, like, not
Yeah.
in a way, like, obviously they didn't deserve it, but in your head, you're like, "Oh, they're an awful person, like, they deserve
Mhm,
to die."
mhm. No, exactly. Because I
That's
mean,
usually
if
how
we're
it
gonna
is.
kill somebody off, you well, okay, this is something that I was gonna say. What was interesting is that h she ended up the person who was killed off was a shop owner, and the reason I say that is because cozies that take place in, like like a main street type setting, usually it's the shop owners who are the suspects or kind of involved, and the people who are murdered are like the outsiders, because obviously you want the story to progress and you learn about the shop owners or whatever. So like I can understand if it was, this is me like making something up off my head, but like I can understand if it was like some real estate mogul coming in out of nowhere trying to buy up everything, and he obviously gets murdered. But the fact that it was a shop owner, and like a close knit group of shop owners. I don't know. I just thought that was
No,
interesting.
that is interesting, and then it makes you think of the rest of the series, like, that business has to be filled, so we're gonna get
Yeah.
introduced to a new shop owner and another character.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So, well, speaking of shop owner, new person, I believe his wife Emily said she wanted to take it over, but Emily Watkins is Mick's wife.
Mhm.
Um, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So we can either go through the character list and I'll just save my points for the discussion because I have
Yeah.
a lot of thoughts on this. But anyway, we've got Emily, who is his wife, and hot and cold, I feel purposefully so in the story.
Yeah. She's a suspect, but she has, like, some type of alibi that she was at, like, a horse retreat or anyway, she has an alibi as to where she was when he was murdered, but you know that she knows that her husband was having an affair. So that's the thing with
Mhm.
Mick, and probably the only unlikable thing about him is that he was having an affair.
Yeah.
Um, and his wife knew that and knew the person he was having an affair with, so that, like, in my mind, automatically is like, "Okay, you're a suspect." Like, you
But
found out.
I okay, I agree with you. But there is a point in the story towards the end, and I'm trying to hold back on a lot of this so we can talk about it later. But there was a point in the story where I thought he actually wasn't having an affair
Oh,
because of the whole idea of um writing a book, like getting close to the councilwoman to get her thoughts so he could use it as material for his book. So I thought there was a moment where maybe it would
oh,
be revealed he was leading her on.
Mm.
Obviously, that wasn't the case, but there's a lot of back and forth, and I also feel like the author didn't really know what to do with, or maybe she did, I don't know. But it seemed like she didn't know what to do with Emily's character either, because it's like you love dogs, but also, I mean, yes, you can like horses and dogs, but like she loved horses a lot, but all of a sudden she also loves dogs enough to want to take over the shop, where her loving dogs didn't seem as apparent enough in the beginning to make that obvious. um, I don't know. I just I
Yeah,
think I felt like I was the only person who really liked dogs reading the book, because the guy who owned the grooming salon, he was just like okay about dogs. And the dog um trainer, he only liked the big dogs. He didn't like the little dogs because they were hard to train. And then the councilwoman tried to pawn off her dogs to somebody else. And it's like, does anybody actually like dogs in this
this is
book?
why I was like certain that this really was a man writing this cozy mystery, because I was like, all of the female characters are the ones that are not fleshed out. They've
Yeah.
been very like stereotypical, like hitting, against each other. There was that whole jealousy, like affair narrative going on. And the only like interesting thing about the wife was the moment she kind of like clapped back. So they had a council meeting, like the small businesses, and
I love
she
this scene.
literally went to the mistress, because the mistress had left lingerie at her house, which was kind of like a piece of how she knew they were having an affair,
Hmm.
and had the audacity to ask for the lingerie back. So the wife was like, "Yeah, of course you can have it back." Came to the council meeting in front of everyone and gave the mistress her lingerie, like, "Here you go. You left this at my house." I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah. That was like, I mean, if it were set in another book, I would be all for it.
yeah,
It seemed out of place in this story.
okay,
And I let's just get into it a little bit, because, or at least let me just tell you what my thoughts are, because I can't hold it until the discussion. But
sure.
I know that one of your pet peeves is like women pitted against each other. And so
Hate it.
when the reveal happened, I'm like, oh my gosh, what's Sam gonna think? Because
I
this
was
is
so irritated.
I thought about you, and I'm like, if I think that this is bananas, I can only imagine what you're gonna think about it.
Yeah.
And it was not great for a lot of reasons. Again, I'll kind of hold my thoughts till we get through the rest of this list, but I could see why a lot of people didn't, DNF'd it or rated it low or whatever. Okay,
Yeah.
so
But Spencer is right. A pet peeve of mine, and this is not just with Cozy Mysteries, this is general. I hate a villainous heroine, like
yeah,
when it's always like the jealous, crazy woman, or when women are being pitted against each other,
yeah,
or they're judgmental. Like, oh my God, I hate that so much. It's just,
yeah.
again, that's why I was like, surely this was written by a man.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can definitely see that because of the way
Yeah.
that things panned out. Okay, so we've got
Oh, wait,
Miranda.
wait,
I
before we
Oh
move on
yes,
to
yes,
Miranda,
yes.
Emily was a top suspect in my mind,
Mm,
because I was like, okay, so her husband was having an affair. That's
mhm,
motive, right?
mhm.
And then the whole lingerie thing happened, and I was like, yeah, she definitely is doing this because of the affair. And then it's kind of hinted towards that she might have a relationship with one of the other characters on here. So I was like,
Was it the
okay, so
trainer?
yeah, the dog trainer.
Yeah,
And the dog trainer was one of the suspects too. So I was thinking like maybe for a second they did it together. I was so wrong, because that's
yeah.
not at all what
This
happened. But
light's
Emily,
killing me. Hold on a second.
yeah, she was my top suspect for the longest time, for sure. I thought it was a crime of passion, and I thought she did it.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Especially there was like a scene in which they were like close to one another. Her and the trainer, I mean.
Mhm.
So that definitely could have been something. So we've got, I don't know if I should have added her on here, but I did because she was related to to Mick, and that's his sister Miranda, who
Yeah.
frankly I also didn't think needed to be in there. And when she was introduced, especially so late-ish, excuse me, I thought that she did it. Just because of that, the timing of the
Yeah.
introduction, because there was no other reason for her to be there, and the fact that she essentially was kind of washed out, as in, oh, you know, I came to see what he left me. He should have never married you. And then she didn't end up getting anything. And then she like grumbles and leaves. So it's like,
Like
well,
disappears, like
yeah,
never to be talked about again.
yeah,
She was so
exactly.
unnecessary. She was the suspect in the sense that her motive would have been that it was alluded to that his business was really well off, so she would
Right.
inherit money like in the will. And she was
Yeah.
super argumentative and combative. So you automatically think like, why are
Yeah.
you so defensive?
Yeah. Right.
Um, but yeah, she just like fell off the plot. Don't know why she was
Yeah.
introduced. Yeah,
Yeah. Exactly. And that's why I thought for a split second it was her. And that,
mhm.
for all of those reasons. Okay. So next we've got Detective Summers, which obviously I didn't think he was a suspect, but I wanted to add him on this list because I feel it's worth always mentioning how the police are portrayed in cozies because it usually swings one way or the other. And in this case, so maybe it's just me, but when I was first reading the book, in the beginning, I'm like, are they supposed to be love interests? Because
That's what I thought too. I thought this was a love triangle.
yeah, and then I'm like, well, then the author goes on to mention his age, which okay, obviously he's older. That doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily
that's
write him
fine.
out, but I'm like, I can't understand where this is going. And then he's
Especially because it was mentioned that he looked like an old Hollywood actor. So I was
yeah,
like, their love interest,
yeah,
obviously.
yeah,
I thought the same thing for the longest time
yeah.
until it was alluded to that he was in a relationship with his partner.
Yeah, who is moving off of the to a different department so that they can openly be together. Again, unnecessary. If the author
Completely.
wanted to mention that or like reveal that they were in a relationship, then it's I feel like, and maybe this is my like romance reader talking here, but I feel like they should have had it where he had to maybe like rebuff Courtney, who maybe wanted to like flirt or misinterpreted something. So that way it's like, oh, he's not interested in her. There's another reason why, rather than just, I don't know. I'm glad I'm not the only one because I
Yeah.
couldn't understand what that was.
Yeah, when they were, like, holding hands, I was like, "Oh, I thought this was a love triangle, surely." And that
Yeah,
whole plotline could have been a book in itself, like, his integrity could have been questioned because he was having it like, a relationship with his partner, and then it
love
could have been
that.
a whole book in itself.
Yeah,
It did not need to be in this book at all.
you know what? That's an amazing point. You are absolutely right. And that would have made a great side plot in another book after he's already been established, after we've come to like him, not as a love interest for Courtney, but just like as a detective. Because again, not all of the detectives have to be in a relationship with the main character, but the way that you introduce them to the series is important to set the stage as to what they're gonna be like. So,
Mhm.
yeah, okay. Well, glad I'm not the only one. And okay, so Megan, you thought she was who knows how old until you saw that she was 30, and I didn't question her age only because in my mind the way that she was acting was kind of young. Oh, okay. So Shan, you also thought that she was young. Um, oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that in the sense that there was, like, the social media influencer,
Mhm.
and she was, like, on chat rooms and stuff like
Mhm.
that. I didn't think she was young only because she mentioned a career change. So to
Yeah.
me, when someone's making, like, a career change, that means they already had, like, a previous established career, um, and they're just a little bit older. And she said she was married or dating that boyfriend for, like, what, 8 years or something like that?
Yeah, but they met in the college as freshmen.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah, that could go either way because she did act young.
Mm,
And the things that she went through, you could, I mean, yeah, like late 20s, I feel. I mean, she's 30. Again, that's fine. I wasn't super thrown off by that. But it again, I do think that ages were something that I paid attention to in this story, which it never matters, and I never do in other stories, not just with the detective, but who's the guy who actually I think is supposed to be her love interest, who owns the bar,
oh, yeah.
Brady. He's older than her. Again, that's not a problem. It's just the author mentions that, and then she mentions Emily. No, not Emily. Sorry, she mentions her landlord being the same age as the detective, and like there were enough things to where I'm trying to figure out like this wide span of who what's
Mhm.
happening with stuff.
That's
So
true. That's true.
okay, so let's jump to Petra, who is the councilwoman, and she is the woman that Mick was having an affair with, who I actually feel like her character was the most fleshed out.
Yeah.
She, I think, appeared the most as she should have been, which is a councilwoman or uh someone in office, because she's very persuasive, but obviously when she drops the masks, she's bitchy as well. Um and then in other moments, like, genuine. So yeah, I mean, I didn't actually have a problem with her. I actually thought that she was the most interesting. I didn't love that she didn't like her dogs,
Yeah.
but that added to her character and made it interesting, because it's like I should absolutely hate this woman, but at the same time I'm like, all right, you're kind of doing what I would expect somebody in your position to do.
Yeah, and with her, I couldn't decide like if I thought she was a suspect because of the fact that she was a mistress. Again, crime of passion. That's
Hmm.
such an easy way to like lead into it is like he wasn't gonna leave his wife, so she killed him.
Yeah.
And then I was like, maybe that's too obvious. And maybe she's more of like a Richard Lord type character where she is going to be like the advisory for like the
Mm,
rest of
mm,
the series.
mm.
So she was interesting, but I do think she had the weakest alibi because all her alibi was she
A
had
secret
a
meeting.
mysterious secret
Yeah.
meeting. She couldn't say what it was for and who was involved. So I
Did
was
they
like, girl,
ever say what the meeting was for?
no, she said it was
Yeah.
secret meeting and she couldn't disclose what it was about
Yeah.
or who was in it. I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay, you're a councilwoman, not the FBI." Like
Right. Right.
it was a
It is.
weak alibi. So she
Yeah.
was kind of in my top suspects, but not
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. And you know what? I didn't even think about that. And I'm surprised. Well, the one thing I did like is that even though Courtney was a suspect, the detective wasn't like going super hard on her,
Right.
because she didn't really have a motive. It was just where were you and it happened in your shop. But I'm surprised that the councilwoman wasn't grilled more, or we didn't
Mhm,
see that, because it's like, yeah, a secret like you're not in Congress. It's a small town.
mhm.
What's that? What could be discussed late in secret?
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got Logan Langford, who is the landlord. He's the one who owns
Oh,
Courtney's
yes.
building, a bunch of the buildings. So Courtney's Mick's, he was seen arguing with Mick um about, I don't even remember, but he wanted him out, which as we know wasn't really valid, all of his like excuses and stuff like that. And he was found breaking into Courtney's um
Yeah.
place of business as well. And I mean, he was okay. I didn't think he was a suspect. I think he was just there. I did think it was kind of weird that he broke into Courtney's place.
That's what made me think he was a suspect. See, I had no idea what was going on. I was changing my mind left and right
Yeah,
because
yeah.
when he broke in, I was like, what other reason would he have to break in other than to hide evidence?
Yeah, yeah. It
I
seems
was
like that the thing that's interesting is that like it seemed really immature for him to do that. You
mm,
literally own the building, and she doesn't have security. And if you're going to sneak in, like he seems the way that he presented himself, he seemed like competent enough to and ballsy enough to be like, I'm just going to walk through the front door instead of like
exactly.
scaling the wall or whatever it is that he did on top. So I just thought out of sheer like incompetence, he wasn't the one to do
Yeah.
it.
But his only motive was the fact that he owned all the businesses in the area and
Mhm,
it was alluded to that he was going to sell to like corporate and basically sell all of the small businesses in the hopes to make more money.
mhm.
Um but didn't he have like some ties to like was it his family who had a lot of money? Yeah. So, but he's
Yeah.
also kind of like a Vanderbilt, essentially. Like his family is very like well off and well known and
Mhm,
prestigious. And it's alluded to that he might have debt, and that's why he wants to sell the businesses. Again, the motive itself didn't make sense because if he owns the businesses, he just has to wait till their leases up to
mhm,
sell it.
mhm.
So I
Yeah.
didn't see the motive.
Yeah, and you brought up something that I forgot that kind of it didn't bother like there was a lot in this book. And what I didn't understand or what I didn't think was necessary was this big hype up around like knowing the town's history and these families. Cause I'm
Oh,
like,
I agree. I
this
agree.
is a small town. Like, even if the family has been here for generations, it's not that big of a deal, honestly, at the end of the day. And so, like, everybody kept talking about him and how the people there, like, have you heard of the so and so? Or he's the son of a so. And it's like, I don't care. Like, most people aren't going to know that.
And I mean, setting is a huge deal in cozy mysteries, but this one just felt so outrageous. Like, okay, so they lived in California, but they lived in a place called Carmel. I've never heard of that place in my life, okay? And I could care less about it. Like, it just didn't the setting itself didn't lend itself to the actual plot.
Hmm. Hmm.
How
Yeah.
did you figure out the murder? You a detective, because I have
Yeah.
no idea what was going on at all.
I think you know what? So surprisingly, we'll get to that. Okay, so let's see. So I also added Isabella Acosta on here, and I don't. Okay, I added Isabella and Tish on here, and if I'm being way honest, I already forgot who they are. So
Isabella Acosta, for some reason, hated Courtney and, like, made up
oh, there
some
it is. There it is.
story about Courtney having an argument with the murder victim, which
That's
she
right.
didn't. And I was
That's
like,
right.
why would she even say that? They don't even know each other.
Yeah.
Is she the one who see, this was another plot line that did not need to be introduced. Was she the one whose daughter was in a cult?
That was Tish.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah, that was Tish. And that was also real sideways. Oh yeah. So Carmel um
Guys, I
is a
live in
real place.
California. I've never been. I live in California and
You
I've never
gotta take a trip and let us know if there's a fairy store there.
okay.
Okay, we clearly don't remember who these people are, other than they were taking up space.
Yep. Yep.
And I think it was really just to add more characters to the pool, which there's already so many, and I think we all agree that there were just um, too many characters, honestly. So let's go to Gregory, who was the dog trainer. I do think he was kind of one of the more front runners as a suspect
Mhm.
because um, we all know or we saw that he loved Mick's dog, which I guess I
No.
didn't get that though. Like he was a dog trainer and but he also showed dogs because he had a bad streak for the last few years. But then like he had a bias towards small dogs and only preferred big dogs and was hoping now that Mick was dead that Emily would let him train her dog. Like it was a lot. It was a lot.
Oh my god. I didn't ever think he was a suspect. I was convinced it was a woman, so I didn't think it was him. Um,
Sorry, I'm laughing
but
because somebody's like
that would have been hilarious.
that would have been a hell of a plot twist, honestly. And I do have her on this list, so we don't really need to talk about Brady unless you want to. I added him because I do like to add potential love interest.
Yeah, potential.
Obviously, I didn't think that he did it, but yeah. So Fiona, let's talk about the magic. You and because I feel like she kind of goes right into that. Um, what were your thoughts? I liked the idea of this book. Again, I feel like because we're in spring, this is a spring pick, and like I was ready to lose myself in like some enchantingness or whatever with the fairy. But I was trying to understand, and granted, I know it's the first book and we have to like set something aside to establish the foundation, but like I was trying to understand how that world worked. Like there's a
Mhm.
fairy queen, there's different facets of fairies, which I get, I don't know. Tell me your thoughts before I kind of
So again, I think it's just one of those things where this book was doing entirely too much. I like
Mhm,
magical elements and cozies, I do.
mhm,
But this book was doing entirely too much. It did not know what it wanted to be. Someone mentioned that it felt like the murder was a side plot and the magic was the forefront. I think it was like flipped around, because I think everything
Mm-hmm.
in this book, every plot point, every murder victim, everything in this book could have happened without the magic. If you
Yes.
completely took her character out, Fiona, and that fairies existed, everything would have still happened just fine. So the
Mm-hmm.
magic wasn't like a huge part of it. It was such a side plot, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like it was explained. I don't understand these fairy rules. She
Mm-hmm.
is in training, but she was also like shunned by the queen. But like, are we gonna see the queen later? And like, she's mischievous, but she's also like helping her like find. It made no sense to me. I did not like this magical element whatsoever.
As always, if I love a book and we start talking deeper into it, we're just flipping over rocks of issues because I think you're absolutely right. I wanted the magic. I wanted the
Yeah.
fairy and like the sparkling and all of that. Because I don't read, while I love them, I don't read a lot of magical cozies. And so when I do, I need it like dumped in, very integral to your point. But you take her out, aside from her doing a couple of like little truth sprinkles or calming down the person's dust, she didn't really add anything because she didn't. I think maybe there was one scene, but, like, it's not like she eavesdropped and, like, flew around or, like, "Hey, go follow Emily," because as it's described in the book, she can't fly very far because of
Yeah.
her lack of training or whatever, um, and I wanted more of that. I understand the rules in terms of, like, the 4 fairy types or whatever, mostly because I've seen Tinkerbell, but aside from that, no, it did leave a lot to be desired. One thing I will say though that I enjoyed is watching her make like the description of like making the fairy gardens, only because when we talk about cozies, if they do have themes in them, I want to see that. So like if it's a bookbinder or a baker, I'm gonna want those scenes where they're like baking something or they're fixing a book or whatever. And she does have that. Though I will say she kind of has them a lot, and it was a little hard to rationalize how many she made
That's what
given
I
what
was
they
saying.
were. Like I can understand baking muffins and there's always an occasion for a muffin. But it was a little hard for me to wrap my head around like there's always a reason to make a fairy. I don't know. I don't know. I'm
Yeah, in my head, in the back of my mind, I'm like, how is this a viable business that is like actually able to have income? Because I'm sorry, I don't feel like it that a lot of
yeah.
people are tapping into.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially most of the town thought she was crazy just
Yeah.
talking to herself because they couldn't see the fairy.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like when I think of magic and cozies, I'm okay. So one we read together was the Vampire Knitting Club, right?
Mhm.
If you took vampires out of that book, the book wouldn't happen, right? The plot point wouldn't exist, and it's such like an integral part of the magic and
Mhm.
the town. This one, I'm like, you got it didn't know what it wanted. It didn't know if it
Mhm.
wanted to be like some prestigious small town or if it wanted to be like very fantastical.
Mhm.
So just
No,
pick a
I
lane, pick a
I
lane.
agree with you, and, like, even if she I think it would have made more sense if she stayed at her dad's landscape business, but decided to, like, do an offset where it's like, "I'm gonna offer these little gardens for people to add to their yard for whatever contracts we get to landscape," and you chuck the fairies out of them. It's just somebody building these cute little corners in people's yards, and then you keep on. Obviously, you have less characters. But I will say though, I do suspend disbelief with jobs in cozies because that's kind of the cozy element. You're living in a small town. Of course, you can live in a cute cottage with oceanfront views, even if you're like, selling honey or whatever. Whatever. Just that's
Oh
just
my gosh, and the
how
landlord
we're
is
gonna
a whole other character we were introduced to too.
go.
Man,
Yeah.
there were
Yeah.
so many characters.
Yeah. So, okay, we already talked about the rating. I actually did guess who did it towards like the last three-fourths, which is a huge deal for me, but maybe not because of kind of how things were revealed. The thing that I wanted to talk about the most was
Ugh,
how much the motive upset me and how it made no sense. Now, granted, it made sense in the fact it's like, oh, your husband's having an affair, blah blah blah. But the way that it was played out, that's more unrealistic than fairies because you've got your ex-best friend, somebody who you share a secret with. Like you guys might not be like super tight, but you're not enemies. So that woman has the audacity to have an affair with your husband and have zero regrets and be ballsy enough to walk around. But then on top of that, you're okay with it at the end of the day. Like I know
Exactly.
she had the scene at the courtroom, but when everything was hashing out at the end, and she was just like, okay, that that threw me. That whole situation, I was just like,
Yeah.
"What?"
So I felt like it was a woman just because of the way everything was being panned out, and a lot of them didn't have the greatest like alibis. There was zero way you would have ever figured out the motive and the plot twist. Like I enjoy a good gasp, a little, red herring. There was no
Yeah,
alluding
yeah,
to this plot twist.
yeah,
Like she didn't go to the library and find newspaper clippings of like the nothing. So for those of you who don't know what happened, essentially it was Emily, um, Petra,
Isa Isabella, and that's why I
Is-
put her on the list. And
yeah, and
Isabella.
Isabella. So the three of them were old high school friends and they all knew each other. And when they were really young, they were involved in a car accident that killed someone, right? And because they came from prominent families, it was very much cleared up. The secret of who actually was driving was like buried very deep by money and influence. And they're all holding the secret of who actually like killed this young girl. Um, how would we have known any of that based on
Yeah,
all the characters that were thrown at us?
yeah,
I
yeah.
was so mad.
So then, and that's why I thought originally the husband was faking his affair because what ends up happening is, um, Petra thinks that she's being blackmailed by Emily, who's going to threaten to expose a secret, which never mind. You're worried about that, but you have the audacity to be sleeping with this woman's husband to begin with. But, or sorry, anyway, that part is true. I'm getting all confused. What ends up happening is that Petra, is looking for mixed notes on this book that he's writing because
Mhm.
he did some digging because he was trying to write a story where Petra's personality is going to be the main character, meaning like some prominent council person.
Yeah.
And I
She's writing
thought,
her story.
yeah, and so that's why I thought he wasn't really having an affair with her. I thought he was just leading her on for material, but no, in fact, they were having an affair. And so Petra is going to trying to look for these notes because the notes mention or may mention the bad thing that her and her friends, which are Emily and Isabella, did years ago. But like, it's so much to unpack, like this reveal of I know what you did last summer. It was
Oh yeah.
just so wild, which that's an accurate reveal like description. I just think that there was so many other things that just made it super convoluted. So,
Exactly. Like you could have guessed the person who did it, but you would have never guessed the backstory. We could
yeah.
have cut out like two or three characters, and the our heroine could have been like going to the library and she discovered a newspaper clipping of this old article, and that's how she ties like the three women
Mhm.
together. And then she like goes and like overhears like a meeting that's happening, and they allude to the accident that happened a long time ago.
Mhm.
Like there are so many ways to like tie in everything
Mhm.
that just never happened.
It never happened. Yeah, Jay, this is the part that sent me. The fact that Emily was like, "I never tell our secret." Like, still, even though the woman is having an affair with your I just can't. Oh
That would have been the
my
first thing I did. That would have been the first thing I did. Be like, this woman right here. Let me tell you
god.
about your councilwoman.
Right. It's just so wild. Like, and the thing is, you take all of these shenanigans, I could probably understand them being in a different kind of book. But at the end of the day, this is still a cozy mystery. And
Right.
none of this seems at all like it's not giving the cozy vibe. It's so wildly outlandish.
And no
So,
magic. There's no magic involved in the
yeah.
actual reason as to why this man was murdered.
Yeah. Oh, no, there aren't. Which I'm curious. that leads me to my question that I have for you on if you would continue the series. But I'm curious if magic will play a bigger role because at the end we are introduced to a library fairy. I don't know what her actual role is, but she lives in the library.
God, yes, they were.
Which, which I'm not bothered by the fact that they introduce her at the very end because it's like a little taste, of
Right.
what's to come and like expanding that magic world that we would be privy to. But yeah, what would you continue the series?
Man, I don't know. I don't know because the thing is like, although I was very critical about this book, it wasn't the worst cozy I read. It wasn't the best. It kind of like fell in the middle for me.
Hmm.
And I do believe that with cozy mysteries, for me personally, it gets better the more I read it. The first
Hmm.
book is very rarely my favorite because it's kind of
Hmm.
like an introduction, but I'm also exhausted at the fact that we could potentially be introduced to more characters.
But
You
there's
said
a
no.
character sheet in the beginning. You just print it out, you reference it. I did check the second book, and there's character sheets in that one too. I would actually continue because again, I'm wanting the fairy vibes. And it wasn't, even though it was wild at the end, it wasn't so offensive to where I'm like, no, I can't do it anymore. But I'm not prioritizing this over other books.
Yeah,
So
I've read worse cozies, and nothing was inherently offensive, but I don't think this would be the top of my list. If I was,
yeah,
in a reading slump and I just needed an audiobook to listen to, maybe I would pick up the second book. But yeah, this wasn't something that I could see myself like
yeah,
actively reading like other cozies.
yeah,
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 I feel you guys. I feel you. This
yeah.
was a lot.
It was a lot. It was a
It was
lot.
almost
So
as if like the author was not certain they were going to get signed for another book, so they were like, "I'm
dump
throwing
it all out there.
everything
Yeah. Well,
possible."
what's funny is there are 5 books in the series, and the publisher actually sent me an advance copy of the most recent book. So it's clearly, I mean, also it won an Agatha Award, but it's clearly popular enough to have gone this far. So, um, oh, sorry. Okay, this is one last thing. I I did catch this. So there are quotes at the beginning of every chapter, which is typical, and some of them were anonymous, and others were the author themselves, which I did think was a bit cheeky. I can't even lie. But there's like there are almost 30 chapters. And they all have to have fairy quotes, so you have to make some up on your own.
And then somebody long like earlier in the live show mentioned that the recipes at the end of the book seemed like repetitive because she was like, "This isn't a baking cozy, so why did we have recipes at
Yes,
the end of the book?"
I
Like
totally
many,
forgot about that.
we had like
I
we had like
paused it. I
7.
stopped listening. I stopped listening when we got there because I'm like, okay, I'm done. And it was like recipes. I'm like, okay, done. I didn't even put two and two together because yes, where on earth do recipes come in? Like that's how you know she threw everything, including the kitchen sink,
Literally,
into this.
there was like 7 recipes, and I was like,
Yeah,
I didn't even know they ate that many times. At one point, like
they didn't.
3 brownie recipes. I was like, no, no. I stopped as well. I was like, I'm not listening to these recipes. I'm not making any of this shit.
Exactly. I totally forgot about that. Okay, well, it seems like the consensus from you all is that not continuing or at least not ranking it high on your TBR, which is totally fair. Again, I admit that this book has a higher rating than it should just because of when I read it.
Mhm.
But I'm hoping that our next book club pick for summer will be a little bit more better all around.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So either way, I'm so glad that we read it because it wasn't my TBR for the longest time. I like the concept, but the execution it leaves a little to be desired.
Yeah, and also I think it's fair to say, like, when I rate books, I feel like cozy mysteries I kind of rate on their own, because a
Hmm.
lot of the mystery is the process of like, okay, who did it? Like me trying to figure it out. So it's definitely a different experience, and I tend to rate cozies a little bit higher than like a
Normal
different
books
book.
or other
Yeah,
genres, yeah,
yeah, because for me, I'm like having a good time regardless.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And like you said, this isn't the worst that I've read. So yeah, it is.
Right.
At least it gave us some good talking points.
Exactly. I feel like the lower the rating, the easier it is to like have talking points because we're like, this didn't make sense or this
That's
didn't make sense.
true. That's very valid.
But
Okay,
anyways,
yeah.
we'll have a summer pick as our next pick because this is a seasonal book club. We haven't picked our summer author, so if you guys want to give us some recommendations on Instagram, let us know who you want us to read.
Yes, definitely. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, chiming in with all of your points. I feel like we're all on the same page, which I think also helps with the discussion. And hopefully, you guys will be joining us for our summer pick, which we will announce in a few weeks, not right away, since we still got some time. We don't want to do it too early. But like Sam said, look out on our Instagram pages for that info.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, someone's reading The Beacon Bake Shop. Isn't that one that we read?
Ah, that was the one from Christmas.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Two Christmases? Two
2 Christmases
Christmases
ago.
ago. Yes.
Darcy Hannah, I think.
Yeah. Darcy Hannah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
We'll think about
Great.
doing another first in the series. But yeah,
Yeah.
let us know, guys. We will chat with you guys on Instagram, Teacups Murder. And thanks for joining us.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.